I wanted to continue to talk about the 6 harmonies. Going back to the impetus for this, or how the topic is framed, is at one time the Buddha was appreciating how a community of monks were living together in what seemed to be great harmony, practicing together and so forth. And so he asked one of the monks, how is it that you are able to live together in this way? And Venerable Anuruddha responded by saying, well, I hold mental acts of or thoughts of love, both public and in private. I do physical acts of love in regard to the people that I am living with, and I do verbal speech of love in the people that I'm living with, and I'm delighted. I feel so blessed to live in harmony with this spiritual community. And then the 6 harmonies that the Buddha laid out are ways to cultivate that kind of mind as we live and support one another in community. And you almost, if you just thought about, if that really was the way I practiced in the community I live with, in the community I live in, the larger area of Newport, Eastern Washington, the Pacific Northwest, the United States, the world, in the community of species, of all human beings, your mind would be different. My mind would be really different. And these 6 harmonies are ways to cultivate then that mind. So the first one we talked about was to be harmonious physically. We talked about being harmonious verbally. We talked about what it meant to be in harmony mentally. And then the 4th one is to be harmonious in precepts. And then the 5th is to be harmonious in views, and the 6th is to be harmonious in how we share our requisites. And I thought I'd try to lump them all together, those last 3 together today, because it's the last opportunity to really talk about this for a while. But I decided not to. We're just going to leave that one hanging. Because I want to talk about precepts. So we observe the same precepts and guidelines as we live together in community. And you may recall that I had found from Master Shengyan, the Chinese master from the Dharma Drum Mountain, who had quite a nice take on all these 6 harmonies. But one of the things that it particularly moved me about his sharing on this was the idea that precepts, we have an idea of what we think precepts are. When you become a Buddhist, you take some number of the 5 lay precepts, and that lays your ethical foundation for how you practice the Buddha's teachings. Fundamentally, it's the first step in taking this life commitment not to harm as being a follower of the Buddha, right? And so with each level of precepts that we take, if we take the 8 Mahayana precepts or the 8 one-day precepts, or if there's a deeper level of being aware of not harming, of taking a responsibility to restrain our own afflictive minds through our behavior. And so, if you decide to go on and continue into ordination, you get to take a greater and greater number of precepts. All of them are about helping us not to harm ourselves, not to harm others, and in some ways, I was thinking, well, if you just practice the 348 Bhikshuni precepts, it would also come to being able to have loving thoughts, to have loving speech, to have loving actions, totally in relationship to the people we live with. So whether you're monastic with all those precepts, or whether you're a layperson living out in the world, we also have society rules, which you could say are also precepts, right? We have some agreements that we don't kill each other, or there are some consequences for that. We don't steal from each other. There are some consequences for that. So they're not as clear in society. In my view, I thought I was actually quite an ethical person before I started practicing Buddhism, and I found that I was actually not only not very, I was not. I have to say, it was a shock. Being nice or being a good person requires a lot more of me than just trying to be good. You got to know what good means. And good meant something else when I began to hold precepts. So when we're sharing the same precepts, what it creates is a sense of safety. We're all on the same page. We're all following the same guidelines. And you can feel it, I think. Check me on this, but in our community, when somebody is really not following the precept, what happens is this little sense of fear comes up. It's not safe. So to put it in those kinds of terms, like to then contribute to the safety, the emotional safety, as well as the physical safety of the entire community, we agree that we're all going to go in the same direction and follow these guidelines. If we're all agreeing to follow these guidelines and we have this sense of safety, then we have way much more inner room to do the deeper, harder work of looking at how our afflictions arise, paying attention to how we apply the antidotes, and living in a harmonious way. If we're constantly, oh, now what's going to happen, and what's going to happen to me, of course, that's where we're fixated when we're afraid, then we're still focusing outwards. So we talk a lot about the precepts being a kind of like a fence that guards the monastic. But I think that's also true for lay people as well. You know, that the ethical commitments that we make and our wish to be not to harm throughout all of society creates this sense of safety. And so we are contributing to peace in a chaotic world in a very, very significant way. So the other thing about having precepts as a monastic is that when we break them, because we do, we're human beings, we're not Buddhas. And as I was talking with one of our lay volunteers yesterday, it requires a great deal of humility sometimes to accept that we are human beings and not Buddhas. But we also have the practices of purification that help us restore our precepts. And this is very powerful, and I think Venerable Chödrön was quite wise in building into the Abbey's bi-monthly recitation of our precepts. We also have a ceremony for lay people to renew and reflect on the 5 lay precepts and to recommit to wanting to hold these as our ethical foundation so that we are practicing the Buddhist teachings and can create the safety inside ourselves not to be harming. So this sharing of precepts as a way of creating harmony in community, I think, is very important. And just because we all have the same ones, it might be easy to gloss over that one. But I think the value of sharing those, that we actually recite them with some frequency, helps us, keep them fresh in our mind. The Buddha was extremely wise in giving us this practice. That it's a very important groundwork, and to think of it then in terms of helping to create safety for the community. At least when I think in that way, it makes my own adherence to the precepts stronger. Because I'm not just doing it because, oh gosh, I'm going to have to confess this if I do it, which is a motivator for me, I have to say. Do I want to confess this next time we have? No, I don't. But can I expand my motivation a little bit and go, and what is the effect on the community when I do this? Maybe they find out, maybe they don't. But there's a ripple effect, and it does not contribute to the sense of safety that we need to do our work here. So it's just another one of those, a beautiful wisdom to hang on to and to practice as we work together to create harmony here and to create harmony in the greater world. Very good point. That we may all hold the same precepts, and we're using them as trainings, not as measurements against we measure ourselves and everybody else about whether they're keeping them or not. But we hold it with this mind of these are trainings, and we all know we're trying. There's harmony in knowing that, and there's faith in each other. I find you have confidence in each other's practice because you see each other trying, and that rather than bringing on disharmony brings greater harmony if we hold it in that way. Working on keeping them is the most important. Okay.